All right. What's going on? Facebook family in the house, Instagram, YouTube. I want to say what's happening to each and every one of you. Thank you so very much for hanging out. I am excited about today. Today, like every Sunday, 1 p.m. Chicago time, is the Sunday conversation. The Sunday conversation is so much more than just a conversation about our spirituality. It is so much more about our conversation about who we are together, who we are as people, most importantly, who we are in our truth seeking towards a better relationship with the divine. I want to say what's going on to Talisha in the house. What's happening, Tiffany? All my friends on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. I want to say like, comment, share. You guys, please, let's get this conversation going. I am excited to get going today. You know, today I wanted to talk about something that I felt was so very pressing. You know, we talk to people so much. We talk to each other about what's going on in our day-to-day lives. We talk to people about what our goals, what our hopes, what our pursuits are, what our thoughts are. You know, but very few times in life are we able to really talk about where we see some serious issues. You know, I want to talk to you today about something that I just simply term finding God. You know, I use this term God, I use the statement God in its most generic way. And why do I say that? Because there's so many beliefs, there's so many thoughts, there's so many ideas that are connected, that are created in union with this thought we have about God. I mean, come on. There are so many different possibilities to what God means. In each religion, each one of our various cults, sects, or groups, we constantly go back and forth as to what God means. So when I speak to somebody, when I speak to you today about how to find God, I want to first and foremost establish that I am referring to the ultimate creator, that ultimate spirit. We're not necessarily talking about a mythological being or somebody who necessarily follows suit with whatever religion you might have grown into believing. So believe this when I tell you, there's a lot to be discussed when we talk about this pursuit. So thank you today. Thank you so very much. I'd like for you to comment. I'd like for you to share. I'd like for you to engage. Let's get into this conversation. Let's talk more about it. One of the very first things that I need to tell you, one of the very first things that I want to say to you today is that God cannot be found in a book. For so many of us, we are under the belief, we have this thought that somehow God is in some book. But see, God is not in anyone's book of religion, you know, and that's probably not saying it to the level that I would like for you to hear me. I want to say it to you even deeper. God can never be found because God can't be found at all. And I want to explain it to you so you can understand this deeper. If you think that somehow God is over there and you're here, or God is up there and you're down here, or God is in heaven and you are in this, you know, quasi hell, and you're kind of in this place, you know, if that be the case, if your belief is that God is somewhere and you are somewhere else, then that is an issue from the very beginning. From the very beginning, we have to understand that this is a false belief that somehow God can be separate from you. And if you believe that somehow you and God are separate of each other, then this is why your pursuit of trying to find God can never work. See, because separation is simply a fabrication. And it's important for you to understand that because too many of us have spent so much of our lives believing somehow that we are not connected to God. Worse, that God is removed from who we are and what we go through on a daily basis. You know, separation is a belief. It's not a reality. It's a perspective, not a truth. It's important that we point this out because, again, in my opinion and the way that I have expressed this in the past, separation is simply a fabrication of a false and self-serving theology, okay? And it was given to you by oppressors, by those who used religion as a way of oppressing and controlling, by those who used your fear of a death in the afterlife, your fear that after all of this struggle and after all of this turmoil, after all of these hardships, you would somehow be denied of a future. It was utilizing that fear that created this belief of a God that was no longer present and in your day-to-day life. See, this belief is completely false. So I want you to remove this belief that somehow God is separate from you. It's not the case. You need to look at yourself in the mirror and tell yourself right now, I am not separate from God. God is not separate from me. And what you will learn and what you will see in this conversation today, what you will find in what we talk about, is that the God that is in you is the you that is in God. I want to thank you guys so very much for checking this out. I want you to like, I want you to comment, I want you to share, I want you to invite your friends to be a part of our conversation because we've got a great conversation today. I want to give a special shout out to those of you who check this out on a weekly basis every Sunday. This is the Sunday conversation. You can tune in on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, like, comment, share. Let's keep building, keep growing, and keep expanding this conversation. See, what happened in the 20th century, earliest start of the 20th century, there was this revolution, there was this resurgence of the Christian movement. You know, a lot of them, you just call this evangelism explosion. You know, this whole revitalization of Christianity in America. And it was in this theological construct that we started to really hear how God and you are separate. That God was holy and just, and that you're just a sinner. You're just rotten. You're just rotten at the core. And unless you repent of your sins, unless you let go of who you were and accept Jesus as your sinless substitute, you were going to hell. And this was strange. It was sad. But it was the reality that we were dealing with because so many of us truly believed because of these Christian preachers that somehow this theology meant that we, as virtually all other humans, were separate from God and already on our way to some form of a punishment. You know, this theological misunderstanding about who Jesus was and the life of Jesus and the teachings that so many of us had grown up listening to ultimately became this theory called substitutionary atonement. And I want to break this down a little bit for you because I want you to understand what this basically meant. Because for decades, it had been the exclusive way of how so many of us believed God and us were connected. I want to say this to you because I want you to understand what I'm saying here. For a particular time, we were taught that the reason why Jesus was on this earth, the whole entire teachings that so many of us grew up on, regardless if you are into those teachings now or not, regardless if you believe in God or not, regardless of any of these things, the majority of you started your religious awareness within the belief that there was sin and that God had turned his back on the sin of man, and that at one point he allowed for the substitutionary atonement of Jesus. Now we later find out that Jesus was God and God was Jesus, and Jesus and God and the Holy Spirit was one. And we'll talk about that a little as we get a little further into this. But the thing that I'm trying to get you to see is that for a lot of us, we believe that what we had in common with each other is that we were sinners. And that what we had in common with each other is that we were on our way to death. And what we had in common with each other was that Jesus died. And that if we were to accept Jesus as our Lord and our Savior, that death would somehow allow us to be able to be forgiven for the sins of our ancestors and of our own, and that somehow we would then be rekindled to God and somehow be forgiven. And this is what was taught. But remember, what I'm saying to you is it was not always the belief. You know, for decades, though, even centuries in Europe, it was the prepondering belief. But what you have to understand is that even in Europe, it wasn't even something that most believed until about the medieval times. Between the Dark Ages is truly when we started to believe this theory of atonement. And we're going to get into this because for a lot of people to even question the theory of atonement, it would like sends people into heart attack mode. I mean, freaks people out because so many people think that somehow you can't be a Christian unless you believe that Jesus died for your sins. And you can't be a Christian unless you believe that if you don't accept that death as your passage to God, then you are forever bound to hell. And it's kind of sad, y'all. It's sad because this theological misunderstanding of Jesus' life and death is what's been holding us in this belief of who we think we are, but it's truthfully ignorance of the self. You know, what I want to talk about is I want to talk about how the internet has changed for so many of us who used to believe that we were by ourselves. That we were the only ones who thought that maybe something was strange. You know, and we're taught, you know, you go to anybody, I don't care who it is, you're looking for some form of spiritual awareness. You're looking for some form of ability to understand what the heck is going on here. And what you find out is that so many people are not willing to have that conversation until the internet. And then it was wild, right? Because then with the internet, it's like, wow, I'm not the only one. There's other people who believe and who are searching, who study, who pray, who do all the things they're supposed to do, and they're not coming up with the same answers that our religious people have given us. And it's kind of strange, right? It's really strange, but it's so awesome. Because what we are realizing now is that that negative way of looking at theology has never worked. And it has constantly been rebelled against. It has constantly been the main reason for schisms. It has constantly been the abuse position of the church. See, many of us, we realize this. And what we've done is we've moved away from church. But now instead of abandoning those who need to know the truth, we're stepping back and we're grabbing each other and saving each other from all of this misery. We are realizing that it's not just us, but there's so many people. You know, for the Christian, there are other understandings of the story of Christ. See, but what you have to understand is that because this story was written in a time, and I need to point this out, because it was translated into English at a time that the belief of substitutionary atonement was so real, the words, the writings, the interpretations, the redactions, the conflations, all of the different ways that they wrote the Bible, the thought of substitutionary atonement was massaged into the language. Ooh, it's different when you look at it like that. See, when you understand that the average person's perspective at the time was based on a genre, just based on a category of religious expression within the Christian movement. And because this category was so powerful at the time, all of the wording, all of the rhetoric, all of the logic was based on that particular genre. Some of y'all understand what I'm saying, because some of you understand that as you read through and as you study more about the Christian tradition, that it has not always had the same beliefs. I'm going to give you a very simple example. See, you got a guy like Peter in the Bible, and Peter in the Bible, what's so wild about Peter is he was actually taught firsthand by Jesus. In this Bible, you read through the testaments of Jesus and you find out that here's Peter making mistake after mistake, but being corrected and being taught by Jesus, right? Now, mind you, now he's with Jesus all the way up until Jesus' death. And then after Jesus' death, he goes out and he, starts to preach to everybody about this Jesus and about what it's supposed to mean. And then some 50 years later, here comes Paul. And Paul is teaching Peter what Jesus meant, even though Paul wasn't there and Peter was. So what am I really trying to ask you right now? What I'm trying to ask you is, do you understand that the church has moved in its belief system since its conception? That it is not a fluid piece of information, that it is not something that has been stagnant in its approach, but it's been constantly fluid, always evolving, always changing based on those who were in the leadership position at the time. And more specifically, we are now learning based on a specific time that it was written in. Now, if you read it outside of that time, you'd understand that it was oral tradition, and that oral tradition was not limited to the perspectives that you have now. See, this whole conversation is bottom line about how we get to know God better. But if you believe that God is separate from you, you're going to struggle. And you're going to struggle because you've missed the primary focus. And that primary focus is that you never needed anyone to rekindle your relationship back with God, because very simply, God has always been with you. It's very simple. I hope you understand this, because this is what Jesus actually taught. And you know what's kind of wild about this? Is that if you truly understand what Jesus taught you, you'd see that it's almost exactly the same. It's almost exactly the same as all of the great and long-standing religious traditions that we've all had. But the wild thing is that we're always picking and choosing. We're always taking things in categorically instead of just truly listening and understanding what the story says. And if we first and foremost stop reading the story of Jesus, stop reading the scriptures, stop understanding these lessons from a perspective that somehow a sinner is separate from God, but start to read the stories the way they were actually written, as a person who realized they were the gift of God, they were the breath of the Creator. When we start to realize that we are not sinner, but we are in union with God already. Why? Because we are. But when we start to understand this, then for some of us, we begin to understand more truer the lessons that are taught in the writings about Jesus. Because, see, for some of us, that's not going to be easy. For some of us, and I'm going to say this real simple, for some of us, we're going to have a hard time being able to see the divine in us. For some of us, it's going to be really tough for us to be able to see that we are divine beings of God. And it's going to be tough for us. See, some of us who were raised like I was raised on this theological belief of separation. See, a lot of us, we won't have good footing. We won't have a solid understanding. We won't be able to know where to see our religious path start. Because so many of us believe that we start our path on we are sinners. And that because we're sinners, we needed a substitute because we were all going to go to hell. And see, because we start right there, it's almost too scary to let go of this one-sided way of thinking. Even though you know that it never felt right. Even though you know something was always inherently wrong with it. Even though you know something was wrong and it never felt right. Worse, it never made sense. See, but when you do begin to let go, however, you discover something beautiful. See, what you discover is that you are not some worthless being. That you are not luckily saved by some concept of sacrifice, but that you were always in union with God. See, when you do let go and you discover this, you realize questions like, how do I find God, are inherently strange. Because instead of that, you realize that you are always with God. God is always present. And you are always with God. See, this produces real transformation in how you think. It changes the way you live. Most importantly, it changes the way that you treat people. See, because when you start to change your thinking about yourself and about God, then you realize that just like you, there's no separation between God and his creations. There's no separation between God and every woman, God and every man, God and every child, God and every divine being. See, you didn't inherit some faulty gene or some, forever present sin because of one of your ancestors' screw-ups. See, we need to realize that we need to move away from that myth. See, this is one of the things that I sit down and I ask people who are believers in this substitutionary atonement. These people who believe that God had to have a blood sacrifice in order to forgive us. I always say, well, if it was really about the law, if it was really about the fact that God had to have some form of a sacrifice, if it was really always about this kind of thing, if the belief was that in order for us to be around God, we needed to serve the law of right and wrong, then it's really about the law, and it has nothing to do with God's love. And see, the thing is, that's all Jesus' teachings were about. They were teachings that showed that what was more powerful than the law of God was the love of God, because it was the love of God that put the laws in place. But they weren't laws to oppress you, but they were laws to teach you. See, what we have to understand ultimately is that God has always had the ability to be amongst those who made mistakes. If you don't understand it, then you would never understand the prodigal son. See, because God's story was all about forgiveness. See, because if you needed a sacrifice, then the prodigal son would never make sense. See, if the thought was that at some particular point you were going to go out into the world and realize the inevitable shortcomings of your bright ideas. See, if God didn't already know this, then the prodigal son wouldn't make any sense. See, because the truth of the matter is that as we get to know who we are and as we get to know our purpose, we step away from our strength, from the things that we know, and start to build upon the things we believe in. As we receive more wisdom, we come back to that which is true. See, this is the prodigal son who goes out realizes that the direction he was going wasn't working. So what does he do? He makes a firm decision to repent, go back to his father's home. See, he didn't need to kill anything. He didn't need to be ridiculed. He didn't need to pay anything back because the father was loving and knew that he would inevitably turn. See, if you could understand the teachings of Jesus, separate them from the teachings about Jesus, then you would see the lessons that that faith expression was trying to give. But too many of us are into the religion of Jesus and know nothing about the teachings. Some of you have actually believed and have listened to pastors who have told you that God was too pure to be around sin. God's holiness required sacrifice so that he could even be in fellowship with sinners. Well, if that was true, then explain to me the stories in the Christian Bible about how Jesus sat at table with sinners. See, again, here's when you, and I'm not, listen to this. Listen, there's no knock on Christianity. Okay, if that's what you choose to use as your way of connecting with the divine, then God bless you. But understand, you cannot use a religion. You have to use the relationship. And the relationship teaches you that Jesus sat with sinners. Why? Because when you know yourself, you become the light for others. And the light is going to attract those who are in the dark. You can't separate yourself from that. That's not natural. See, so don't tell me that in order for God to be able to be around you as a so-called sinner, he needed to have some sacrifice in place, because that doesn't make scriptural sense. You know, how are we to understand one member of the Trinity, we'll call him the Father, being wrathful towards the Son? What am I saying here? Very simply, how exactly is it that God got to kill God in order for God to be happy? See, some of you believe this because it was taught to you, but you never did the math. Worse than that, you knew it didn't make sense, but you didn't want to touch it because you were scared to stand out. See, but you knew, like I knew, that how is it possible that God would kill God and that they were the same and the Holy Spirit, and that was all the same, but yet and still God killed God or allowed himself to be dead for you. See, when you get to understand the power of your true divinity, you no longer become needing of such a conversation, because you no longer rely on religion. You have a relationship. See, can God actually punish God? I got another question for you. If God punishes God, does God actually feel it? See, I'm not trying to be funny with you. I'm trying to get you to think about it. Think about what you're believing. Too many of us have become so stressed, so downhearted, so just lost, because we're going to an outside source for an inside resource. You need to understand God is in. If God the Father needs someone to pay the price, all right? Does the Father ever really forgive you? I mean, think about this. If you owe me $1,000 and I hold you to it, I hold you to pay for it, unless somebody else pays it for you, did I ever really forgive the sum of $1,000 that you owed me? I don't think I did. Did I ever forgive your debt? Seems that nobody would believe that I forgave your debt, because the whole concept of forgiveness, the whole idea of forgiving, means to let go of it, to absolve you of it, not to get it from somebody else. That's not forgiving. No, that's telling you such and such picked up your tab. But if that such and such is God, and God picked up the tab for your transgressions, then God forgave you. And that's what the story is all about. See, because if we really think that our sins and our guilt are the sort of things that can be literally transferred over, I'm thinking about literally transferred over to another person so they can assume it, you have not read the scriptures. Because in the scriptures it'll tell you that nobody can seek the punishment of another person's sins. I mean, you have to remember something. These people had scriptures in place already. And we'll talk about this a little further. But the main thing that we have to understand is that Jesus in this story didn't just come to die. You know, it just wasn't the only focus. So I hope you understand what I'm telling you is that when we start to read the teachings, they become different than the religion. And so when you start to understand that the whole entire focus was for us to better bond with our Creator, when you understand that the entire story was teaching you that no matter what you are worried about, no matter what you're concerned about, no matter what your day-to-day material focus is, there is a Father, a Creator, a divine presence that is always there, always watching, always loving. And that we need to let go of the foolishness of today and focus in on the power of our future, which should dictate our present. And that's what the whole entire teaching was about. But so many of us, we get it caught up. We get so far deep. Man, we are just taught to another place. Was Jesus' whole purpose just to die? I'm going to raise a more controversial question. If it is true that God's wrath had to be appeased by sacrificing his own son, then all those stories of Moloch, all those stories back in the Old Testament about, sacrificing your child so that you can become one with God, all those stories of how God said, I never asked, nor did I ever think about it. That's what your scriptures read. Go back and check them out. See, if your scriptures teach you that this has never been the way of the Creator, then I guess your scriptures were wrong. Those Moloch followers, they had it right the whole time, right? No, that's not true. It's impossible. It is impossible for that to be the case. Penal substitution's view makes it seem like the real issue was that there needed to be legal resolution. Because that's all it is about the law. See, it's not about the love, because love forgives. I'll give you a perfect example. Perfect example is when somebody does something to you and it hurts you or it violates you as a person or your property, and they apologize, and your love for that person makes you say it's okay. See, this is where you see love overrules. Love supersedes the legal system. Because through that love, you've let it all be done. It's over. It's no problem. It's gone. See, this is what the scriptures initially taught. But right now, they're so religiousized. They're so caught into a tradition of oppression that you are not taught to see God as a divine nurturer, but you are taught to see God as a punisher, as a judge, as one who will rule out justly. And we look at justice as anything that gives you what you got coming. And we're foolish in this regard, The theory of Christ's death, it changes how God sees us. But the theory says nothing about how we are supposed to see ourselves. See, and this is where the real problem is because ultimately, if the only thing that gives you access to the greatness of truth is somebody else's hard work, what about the hard work that you need so desperately to become who you need to be? Because if you truly listen to what the teachings have taught you, the teachings taught you that you must, within your own desire, within your own want, within your own need, to be true and one with the Most High must step into a particular approach, must walk a path, must believe that I got to let it go today and go this direction in order for you to obtain the necessary truths and in order for you to be able to become ready for the process of enlightenment. See, this is what we were really taught. But see, the problem ultimately becomes that we find it so much easier to just dumb it down to religion, not to use what God is giving. God is giving you this amazing thinking device. But see, we are taught by a religion that when you think, you're doing it wrong. When you try to utilize a gift of God, you're doing it wrong. I'm going to tell you what you utilize. You utilize something that you know for a fact didn't come from God, and that's faith. Why? Because faith tells you to let go of every single gift God gave you and go with what somebody else is telling you. If you believe that, okay. But you're going to have a lot to have to deal with when you do that. Because see, what God has given you is the ability to see the greatness within yourself. And when you understand self, when you see the power that you are, when you see the divine creation that you are, when you see the amazement of a species that you walk in, when you see the greatness, you have no choice but to know that which created you is even that much greater. See, when you know yourself, you have no question of the divine power of the Creator because you are aware of the vernacular of this so-called self. And see, this is what it's really all about. Because, you know, as I study more and more about Christians in America, the most amazing part of the study is that so many Christians, they believe that they are Christians, but it doesn't necessarily impact the actions that they make. See, when we look back and we see slavery, when we look at the oppression of women, when we look at the mistreatment of people who don't believe what you believe, when we look at the flat-out genocide, when we look at the murder, the disregard for life, we see that these are all religious issues. So if you really believe that your religion is the right decision to base a relationship on, I promise you that you will be taking in parts in that religion that have nothing to do with the so-called God you say you serve. And that's going to bother you because one day it's going to come to your mind, it's going to come to your awareness that you must dig deeper than your religious textbooks. You must dig deeper than whatever your pastor is willing to tell you in order for you to become right with truth and right with who you are supposed to be. You're going to have to do some truth seeking. I'm going to say it again. You're going to have to find out who you are when you let go of who everybody else tells you to be. See, I challenge you on something real quick, all right? Because I want to first and foremost point out to you, in order for you to get to know God, it's not through a sacrifice. And if you disagree, if you don't believe me, show me one word. Show me one word within your religious teachings that a so-called person said that the only way for you to do is for it to be done this way. Show me not what another person said about another person. Show me in your writings where Jesus said the only way that you can ever get to the Father is if you believe that I had only come to this earth to die and that it's through my death that you get resurrection. It's absolutely impossible because they have said it and they will tell you 100 times over that the belief that Jesus taught is that when you realize that God is not an outside thing, but that God is in you and all around you, when you believe that Jesus has taught you that because you are who you are, strictly because of who you are, God got your back. And that you need to let it all go and stop trying to overthink it. But believe that because you are built, because you are created, because you are made by a spiritual greatness, that greatness is in you. And you cannot escape it. See, this is truth. And when you understand this, when you realize that the number one problem that Jesus had in these stories, I don't care if you believe the stories or not, but at least be able to cognitively understand them, comprehend them, and be able to establish what the stories are teaching you. See, what the story is teaching you is that at the time you had a stronghold. I'm going to explain this stronghold to you very simply. At the time you had a stronghold. You had a temple practice. The Jews had a temple practice. In order for you to be right with God, you had to have a sacrifice. That sacrifice was monetary gain for the priesthood. So you'd come with your sacrifice. If you didn't have a sacrifice, you had to pay. You had to have money. Okay? And this money was then collected and it was given to the church, to Rome. And Rome used it as a tax. Okay? And whoever could keep that tax coming was able to be at the height of the priestlyhood. They got to run the game. Do you understand that? Okay, so here comes this religious rebel. His name is Jesus. And this religious rebel within this teachings, if this is the teachings you receive, the comprehension within the writings say, this religious rebel says, it doesn't matter what you pay to that temple. That temple ain't going to get you to heaven. That temple isn't going to get your relationship with God. That temple isn't going to get you the righteousness you need to be in the companionship of the hereafter. See, this is what that particular writing said. And this particular writing said, no, it ain't coming from Rome. No, it ain't coming from the temple. Yes, it's coming from God. But yes, God is in heaven and the heaven is in you and all around you. When you get this, you get eternity. And nobody can take it from you. And to prove it to you, they'll kill me, but they can't kill the spirit in me. And the spirit in me will stay with the divine. Will always be with the divine because I am the divine. When you get this, when you understand the power of the teachings, when you can finally comprehend not the religion, but the actual words, when you see it, then you make an opinion for yourself. Because every single epistle was supposed to be based on these words. So now what do they say? My flock know my voice, and the strangers they will not follow. Well, you can't know a voice if you've never studied. See, because now the only voice that you can actually rely on is the one that's inside of you, the one that's been teaching you the whole time. Don't go into a book looking for a relationship. The relationship is inside you. Now I challenge anybody. I challenge you. By all means, come up with something that you think can compete with that. And I honestly will tell you that I've spent years proving to people that they don't have a clue when it comes to these documents, because these documents say a lot of different things to a lot of people. Yes, you can show me where it says it your way, but I can show you where it says it's my way. And that's the whole problem with this, is that if it's all based on what you read, you will always be deceived. Because if faith is based on an inside conversation, it can't be written out because it's so unexpressible. You know? And this is what I'm trying to get you to see. Stop looking in a book. Stop. God has so many portals, there's so many books, there's so many different religious writings, so many different things that it can be. What you have to understand is at the end of it all, the God you are seeking is in you. So you can chase around the world, but you're going to bring the God you're looking for. So stop looking outside, start looking in. Start to understand this, okay? Seriously start to understand this. Because when you understand this, you got the first part of truth. The very first part, and that is that God has so many portals. He is not out there. He's in there. You know? He is the you are searching. The second is start to look at your thoughts. Okay? And separate your thoughts into spiritual and material. They're very simple. Certain thoughts edify the spirit. There's no fear in these thoughts. They're never worries. See, and then there's fears, there's thoughts about material. Material is almost always fear-based. You know, I need to get more. I need to do more. I need to try more. I need to be more. I need to do all these different things. See, the thought of being anything more than you are is material. Because the spiritual you is so much more than you can ever comprehend. It's so much more than you can ever possibly use. that the last spiritual thought would ever be in fear. The last spiritual thought would ever be that you don't have enough. So understand the difference between thinking there. And know what I'm talking about here. Regard your thoughts more sincerely. Start to realize which one of your thoughts are spiritual. Start to realize which one of your thoughts are material. And most importantly, understand the difference. You know, I know some of you are checking out what I say and so many times just kind of going with it just to see if you agree or disagree, you know. And you'll always find things you can disagree with. You know, I can say things that are easy to disagree with. So if you're looking for them, you'll always find them. The thing is, why though? Because ultimately the truth of the matter is that there's so many different schisms within the church. There's so many different things that are disagreeable within the church. I'll give you a perfect example. I go back to the whole story about the sheet with all of the unclean foods. And to understand that Paul tries to tell Peter that Peter can't sit with unclean people and that Peter did the wrong thing. You know, he opposes Peter. For those of you who don't read, I don't want to get too deep into this, but I'm showing you there were schisms from the very first day. And the reason there were these schisms is because, again, if you believe that a tradition or a perspective is what God is, you got it all wrong. God is the peace, the spiritual truth that you feel on the inside, devoid of material, devoid of fear. I always ask people, who does it serve? If it serves man, then it's man. If it serves God, then it's God. I don't care if it's in your book. I don't care how many times it's written. If it serves only man, it's man. We need to know the difference. Start to find the thoughts in you that only serve God and manifest and boosters everyone else, teaches you to love each other. Once you can understand that, then you got this thing. And I mean, you truly got it. And start really believing that God dwells inside of you. See, and I don't mean some outside force on an inside being. See, we all know that you are not the body that you're in. Love this story once where this guy had really tried to critically analyze what was him and what wasn't him. So, you know, he said to himself, well, if I remove my fingers, would I still be me? Yeah, you still be you. Well, what if I remove my elbow? Would I still be me? Yes. What if I remove both my arms? Would I still be me? Yes. What if I remove both my legs? Would I still be me? What if I remove my chest? What if I remove my neck? What if I was a whole body, but I didn't have a head? Would I still be me? So it couldn't be my head either. Couldn't be my brain either. If my whole entire body was here and I was walking around, but I didn't have my head, would I still be me? You'd still be you. The question is then, what is you? And you realize that you are not a body, but you are spirit. And that spirit, and watch what I'm saying to you, please understand what I'm saying to you. That spirit is 100% in the presence of God. That spirit is 100% in cohabitation with God. That spirit is 100% in connection, okay? Is in one source. And once we understand that, when you understand that the God that dwells in you is the you that dwells in God, when you get this, then man, you are cooking with gas. Really cooking with gas. Remember that God also dwells in the same way in others too. And when you understand that God dwells this exact same way in others, it makes you more respectful towards others. Some of you are willing to see that life is God and all things with life is God. See, some of you are willing to see that, but when you can at least see that the power of divinity that's in you is the power and divinity that's in other people, man, you really start to see the truth. You really start to see what is real. You really start to see the power that is God. And it makes you so much more humble. It makes you empathetic. It makes you connected. See, now I don't need to know you personally. I know your God. Walk right up to you and give you a hug and blow your mind. People always ask me, why do you use the love button? I say, because we need more love. We don't need to be liked anymore. We don't need to be laughed at. We don't need to be wowed at. We need to be loved. You know? And we need to understand that this love is the connection between us that creates our divinity, that signals, that signs, that bears witness to the unification through the power of the divine. When you get this, man, now you've got that pursuit down pat. You will no longer have to worry about how to know God. You will know yourself. And this is what it's all about. The most ancient relics that we can find on faith and religion say, man, know thyself. Because it's in that knowledge that you will know God. And that's ancient, y'all. That's so ancient. Be still. Be still and know that I am God. You know? Some of you will look at it and say, oh, that's Psalms 42:10. I know what that is. I got that. But really think about it. Because if you understood what it meant to be still, that means stop thinking that it's something you do. That is the greatest statement of your foregone divinity, of your, without question, nobody can take it away, that the conversation is over, foregone conclusion that you have a divine self. When you can be still and know there's nothing you need to do. Nothing. Nothing. There's no religious belief you need to have. There's no tradition you need to follow. All you have to do is be still and know that the divine is there. And you guys, this has been such an awesome opportunity to talk to you. Some of you are going through some tough times right now. Some of you got some really, really hard situations that you're going about. Some of you need a word. Some of you need to believe that things are going to get better. And I'm going to tell you right now that before you ever start to think that things are as bad as you think they are, understand this. Understand that God is with you through anything that you think is bad, and nothing can be bad when you have God with you. And what might seem to be unfair, what might seem to be too much, what might seem to take you to your very limits are things that you can not only overcome, not only get through, not only withstand, but things that you were designed to be sustainers, survivors, successful in the end. You are not the person you see. You are the seer of the person, which is deep. But you have to be willing to see that truth. You have to be willing to step outside of this ego, this belief, this false perception that whatever I see in the mirror is me, when you can step away from that and understand that it is only the perceiver. It is only the one who sees that is real. What he sees, what she sees, is only an image. Hey, until next week, it's your boy ToneDuncan. Love y'all. Sunday conversation. I want you to go over to truthseekers.com. I want you to go over to Truth Seekers on Facebook. That's TruthSeekers. Truth Seekers on Facebook. Truth Seekers. TruthSeekers. A little strange spelling there because I had to find something. All right, I want you to join that. I want you to like. I want you to comment. I want you to share. Until next week, y'all. Much love. Peace.